In 1854, a 4-year-old girl arrived in Cincinnati from Italy with her family. She would grow up to change lives.
She was a modern-day Mother Teresa.
Even save lives.
Sister went and basically saved this person from being hung.
Little Maria Rosa Segale became Sister Blandina of the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. And now, she's on track to become a Cincinnati saint. Sister Blandina Segale spent most of her life in Cincinnati. Her life of service left an indelible mark on the Queen City, but you may have never heard of her. Blandina's early years of ministry were spent on the western frontier of Colorado and New Mexico. There are shrines built to her and gardens named for her there. Buildings bear her name, plaques mark her accomplishments. It's the work she did in the Wild West that led the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, New Mexico, to open her cause for sainthood in 2014.
We believe Blandina is a saint. She recognized the dignity of everyone. From an outlaw to an innocent child, she recognized their dignity. And that dignity gives every one of us hope. People said she was a shaker and a mover, but she was a talker too, because she could talk people into doing things that they never thought they would do, because she recognized in them dignity. The people of New Mexico and of Ohio have experienced this woman's life, and that effect on people has caused people to petition to say, we recognize that this person is an example for the world, and that this person also is doing intercession for us.
Sister Blandina has been called a dynamo, a firecracker, and a spitfire. Now, she can officially be called Servant of God, since the Vatican agreed to consider her for sainthood. Her encounters with the outlaw Billy the Kid are legendary.
Billy the Kid.
That's right, sister.
TV shows and movies have been made about them, and Sister Blandina is even a comic book hero. She entered the convent when she was just 16 years old. In 1872, she was assigned to serve as a missionary in Trinidad. She assumed she was heading to the Caribbean. Instead, she was sent here. This Trinidad back then was part of the Colorado Territory, and it was here that Sister Blandina had her first encounter with Billy the Kid. She was just 22 when she traveled alone across the dusty and desolate land of the Wild West to join other sisters already there.
So she's coming from Ohio, right? She's coming from Cincinnati by herself, okay? And people have to realize that during this period of time, they called this area that she was coming into the Wild, Wild West. It wasn't because it was a tame West, it was a Wild, Wild West. There was no law and order here, none whatsoever.
The nun came face to face with the outlaw after a shootout injured one of the kid's bandits.
He's just a boy. Help me get him inside.
That's no boy. That's a dirty little murderer.
Sister Blandina cared for the injured man when no doctors would. The encounter plays out in this episode of the old Western TV show, Death Valley Days.
You know what he'll do to them no good doctors wouldn't lift a hand to help a friend of his. He'll kill him.
And that's what Billy the Kid planned to do until he made a deal with Sister Blandina. Since she cared for his friend, he promised her a favor. She asked him to spare the lives of the 4 doctors, and he did. Then, he promised Sister Blandina he'd protect her and the sisters from any attacks from his gang.
Sister, when you say your prayers, maybe you could just mention Bill the Kid.
I will, Billy.
Years later, on her way to Santa Fe from Trinidad, Sister Blandina would encounter the kid again. Bandits were attacking stagecoaches. People traveling with her were concerned and feared getting robbed. The driver saw the bandits approaching. Here are Sister Blandina's own words, written in a letter to her sister about the ordeal.
The light patter of hooves could be heard as they drew near the carriage opening. As the rider came from the rear of the vehicle, he first caught sight of the two gentlemen in the front seat, which gave me a chance to look at him before he saw us. I shifted my big bonnet so that when he did look, he could see the sisters. Our eyes met. He raised his large brimmed hat, looked his recognition, fairly flew a distance of about 3 rods, then stopped to give us some wonderful antics on bronco maneuvers. The rider was the famous Billy the Kid.
After that encounter, the stagecoach continued on its way to Santa Fe at breakneck speed. It arrived in record time, earning Sister Blandina the nickname, the fastest nun in the West. Sister Blandina would beat Billy the Kid a 3rd time when she was ministering to prisoners in the Santa Fe jail, and he was an inmate.
I have just returned from jail. The 2 prisoners were chained hands and feet, but the kid, besides being cuffed hands and feet, was also fastened to the floor. You can imagine the extreme discomfort of the position. When I got into the prison cell and Billy saw me, he said as though we had met yesterday instead of 4 years ago, "I wish I could place a chair for you, sister." Think, dear Sister Justina, how many crimes might have been prevented had someone had influence over Billy after his first murder.
Sister Blandina's encounters with Billy the Kid won't make her a saint, but her work out here on the Western frontier and back in Cincinnati very well could. Trinidad, Colorado is a picturesque town that sits about 13 miles north of the New Mexico border. It's home to slightly more than 8,000 people. It was far more rugged and lawless when Sister Blandina arrived in the 1870s. Today, a monument to her impact and influence stands along the main street through town. The Sister Blandina Wellness Gardens was dedicated the summer of 2021. It's a gift to the town from a Catholic Colorado businessman, Jay Chimino, who grew up there.
The Catholic church that's right next to some lots that he bought, and he already owned a few more.
The life-size, 5-foot, 4-inch tall statue is the focal point. It overlooks the landscape of flowers, fountains, and a fire pit. In her hands, a school book proudly displays the number 1, meaning Trinidad was the first school district in the territory. Behind the statue are the names of others who worked to educate, help the sick, and minister to the needy.
And the Sisters of Charity and the Jesuits and Sister Blandina were really the backbone of what really founded Trinidad, Colorado.
The garden is an outdoor sanctuary for both public and private events. Up next, challenging a lynch mob in an effort to save a life.
This is the Super Bowl of investigations.
The private investigator hired to prove Sister Blandina's heroic actions and how he did it. There are a lot of things that need to happen before Cincinnati's Sister Blandina Segale is declared a saint. The process could take years or even decades.
So the canonization process for Catholics is not to give a title or an award to someone, but rather to recognize 2 important things. One, that they're an example for the world, that their values are something we need today, and their work is something that we can imitate today. And then for those who have faith, that is someone that you can ask for intercession. And not that the saint has a power, but has a relationship with Christ.
Traditionally, causes for sainthood are opened in the diocese where the servant of God died. In Sister Blandina's case, that would be Cincinnati. But an agreement between the Archbishop of Santa Fe and Cincinnati's Archbishop, Dennis Schnurr, allowed the process to be transferred.
I became aware of the process in 2014 when Archbishop Michael Sheehan, who was the Archbishop of Santa Fe at that time, he was very aware of the reputation of Sister Blandina, and he was very interested in promoting the cause. The devotion to her, the awareness of her really saintly and some say even miraculous activities of her ministry in the Diocese of Santa Fe. That's why Archbishop Sheehan came to me and said, yes, the burial is here, and he needed to make certain that the grave was properly maintained and so on. But the awareness of her saintly activities is really in Santa Fe, where she ministered for 25 years.
The inquiry into her life here and in the Wild West is completed, and it's all up to the Vatican now. The investigation into Sister Blandina's life was made a bit easier by the letters she wrote to her biological sister, Sister Justina, who was also a Sister of Charity. Those letters were published as a book called At the End of the Santa Fe Trail. Alan Sanchez is the petitioner for the cause, meaning he organized the effort that could lead to Sister Blandina being canonized.
We gather their information, their life, their writings, what people wrote about them, what they said about them, all their behavior. It's like convening a grand jury, but not to look for guilt, but heroic virtue. Heroic virtue means that you're willing to pay the price of your own well-being, sacrifice your own gain for someone else. Then that's gathered and that's sent to Rome with all of her writings, all of her history, all of her deeds, and what people said and thought of her. Our investigator, we want him to go out and find us information about stories in the book. And they're incredible stories.
The 50 years that I've been doing investigative work, this is the highlight. This is the Super Bowl of investigations. So I've done investigative work where you have to do background going back 30 years, and that within itself is extremely difficult. In this particular case, I had to go back 141, maybe 145 years. It was a very specific directive, and that was to verify an incident in which Sister Blandina saved a gentleman from being hung in Trinidad, Colorado.
It was the mid-1870s, and the man about to be hanged had shot another man. This story became another episode of Death Valley Days.
Nobody in Trinidad's ever stopped a lynch mob.
Then I must say it's high time someone did.
As Sister Blandina writes, a child ran into her classroom saying his father was about to be lynched for shooting a man named Mr. McCafferty.
He said a mob gathered and placed men about 40 feet from the jail to Mr. McCafferty's room. The instant he breathes his last, the signal of death will be given, and the mob will go to the jail and drag Dad out and hang him.
Blandina first visits the victim and convinces him to forgive the shooter. He does on the condition the man faces trial.
All along the main street and leading to the jail were men at about a distance of a rod apart. These were the men who were to signal Mr. McCafferty's death by 3 taps of our school bell in order that the mob might proceed to the jail, take the prisoner, and hang him.
Then Blandina, the gunman, and the sheriff walk through the lynch mob to visit the injured man so the gunman can ask forgiveness in person.
All along the road, we kept silence and no one spoke to us. When we got within a block of the sick man's room, we saw a crowd of men outside the door. It was at this junction that our fears for the prisoner began.
But you visualize people out there with pitchforks and other stuff saying, we're going to hang this guy. And a mob. And she quailed that. It was just, no, Please, no. That takes a lot of intestinal fortitude, and I believe that the Holy Spirit moved her. I mean, she was, I don't know what her weight was, but it seems like she was, maybe 90 pounds wet, soaking wet, and she did this.
I think the interesting thing that makes the end of the Santa Fe Trail so real is like she basically says, I was quaking in my boots, to go out there and face a whole mob of people that are ready to lynch somebody, and yet she did it because she had seen herself vigilante justice.
For her to come up against men in that capacity took a lot of guts. I think she was moved by the Holy Spirit. She had to be.
Sister Blandina's remarkable bravery put an end to lynch law in Trinidad.
The gunman was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hard labor in prison. But he lived.
So it's kind of like any kind of mosaic. You get one little piece of the puzzle, start putting it together. And anyway, I found the documentation that verified all these names and everything in Sister Blandina's book.
Actually, in the end of the Santa Fe Trail, at the end of the part when she goes back to Trinidad, she actually goes and visits the family, and the man is there.
Years later, the man's daughter wrote to Sister Blandina, thanking her for sparing her father's life.
It really comes down to this. You either believe Sister Blandina or you don't. And she's not a person that would lie about anything. I mean, she's just not. She had no reason whatsoever. She was documenting this stuff not for a novel, not for a movie, not for anything. She was writing to her sister and telling her how it was in the Southwest, in the territory of Colorado and in New Mexico.
This is one of the proven adventurous stories among the 4,000 pages of documents now in the hands of the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of the Saints. Each page had to be stamped with the seal of the Sisters of Charity Archives to prove it was authentic. The Congregation for the Causes of the Saints will then make a recommendation to the Pope whether to move Sister Blandina's case forward. Up next.
He said, "You've got 2 years to live."
Given a death sentence from her doctor, this local woman says Sister Blandina saved her life. How she says the power of prayer led to her medical miracle. There are 3 steps the Catholic Church takes before declaring a new saint. The servant of God becomes venerable, then blessed, and then saint. If the Pope recognizes Sister Blandina as having lived a heroically virtuous life, she will be declared venerable.
That means they should be imitated.
Beatification is next. Blandina will be beatified after one miracle is recognized through her intercession.
At this point, we have 41 miracles attributed to her intercession. This means someone believing that I have asked for help and the help comes to me. But not from the saint, not the person, but from God.
Pam Kent of Delhi believes she is one of those 41 miracles. She was an active mother of 3 when she became mysteriously ill. At first, doctors thought it was bronchitis, then asthma. One day, she couldn't get up off the couch, and paramedics were called.
And my oxygen level was down to 56, 58, 60. And they're like, you're in distress. Lips were purple, fingers were purple. The doctor said, well, we're not quite sure what it is, but you're 51 years old and you're going to be going home with oxygen. And you need to wear that 24/7. They just kept calling it interstitial lung disease, and that's a broad term for we don't know what the hell it is.
Pam was put on steroids, and with her oxygen tank, she tried to live her life. She did therapy and workouts to try to regain her strength.
Doctor had no idea what it was. No. He's sending reports off to Michigan, off to Colorado, off to wherever, and nothing is coming back.
And Pam was getting worse. The doctor ordered a lung biopsy. It caused more problems than it solved.
The doctor came in, and he was a very renowned, known doctor. And he's looking at the reports, and he said, you know, look, you've got 2 years to live. We are now thinking it's pulmonary fibrosis. Your lungs are all scarred, honeycombed, and broken glass. Those were the words they kept using. And you will have an absolutely horrible death. You will suffocate. You will not be able to catch any of your breath, and there's not going to be a darn thing we can do.
Devastating, because he was so to the point. Your daughter's going to die within 2 years, and this is how she's going to die. He left, and then we checked to see if what he was saying was true, and we could not see any reason why it wasn't true. Interstitial lung disease was the culprit, and it was crystallizing the lungs. I was concerned that maybe we could have a lung replacement, but the way I understood it, that wasn't available because they didn't know what caused it to begin with, and that if they replaced the lung, the same thing might happen with the lung that they replaced.
By now, others had noticed the change in Pam. That included her high school principal, Sister Catherine Ann Connolly. She would see Pam and her family at church each week.
I was shocked when I saw her, I have to say that. If I recall correctly, she had oxygen. Her, I think she was very bloated as far as her appearance was concerned. Pale, I mean, just had no color whatsoever in her face, and was having a difficult time breathing every time. It seems like she had to almost gasp almost every time in between every word she said. I went home and I couldn't get her out of my mind. And I said to the sister with whom I lived, I said, you know, Catherine, why don't we get Blandina on Pam Kent? And she said, great idea.
Unbeknownst to me is when she went to the Sisters of Charity and said, hey, I got this friend who needs our help. And from what I understand, they would meet. This probably started in spring of 15, and they would meet at 6 o'clock and pray to Sister Blandina for my healing.
This is true, we did. There's a little prayer card, and we prayed that almost every day with Pam in mind.
Sister Catherine Ann shared that prayer card with Pam's family, friends, and others, and soon an army of prayer warriors was begging Sister Blandina for help.
It was quite some time, I remember, because one Sunday when I went back, Betty, Pam's mom, said to me, Pam's better. I said, she's better. She said, yes.
I was weaning off of oxygen. I was not needing it. I was feeling better. They took more and more x-rays of me. Less and less honeycombing, broken glass. Like I said, words I've never heard of that they use to describe your lungs. Less white. And to this day, my lungs are clear. There is not a single scarring in my lungs whatsoever. The pulmonologist says you will be in every journal because there is no explanation for it.
The only thing that was in the cards was a miracle. And thank God we received one.
It was amazing. I mean, she was the old Pam Herman again.
Pam, her dad Al, and Sister Catherine Ann Connolly were all interviewed by Vatican officials who came to Cincinnati for the investigation into Sister Blandina's life.
My dad and I, my wingman, we went ahead and went out to the mother house, and they have a room dedicated to Sister Blandina. It's a beautiful place. You walk in there and you're in such awe to begin with. You know, you feel reverent and special and that. And so you went in there and you sat in the Sister Blandina room, and then Father Oscar comes in, and he was very nice to talk to, and it was myself and my dad and Sister Catherine Ann Conley and Sister Catherine Kirby, who has since passed. So we're sitting there, and they pull out this Bible and they say, well, we need you to swear on the Bible that you're telling the truth. And I'm like, holy cow. You know, I mean, this is big time, you know? So I put my hand on the Bible, and you swear to tell the truth. And I'm like, oh God, yeah. You know, are you kidding me? I hope I do. And so he asked me questions and said, you know, I want to go through your journey with you and that kind of stuff. And I said, okay. So, you know, I went through it, and he said, this is great. And then he talked to my dad, and then he talked to the two Sister Catherines. And it was about a 4 or 5 hour ordeal. So this was like the real deal.
Pam and her dad believed the prayer movement started by Sister Catherine Ann worked.
Well, I do believe in prayer. I have to say that. But I can't take any credit for that. I think it was Blandina working. It's faith. I think it's a power of faith, I think. And as I said, the whole prayer thing, I think, was from the community around. I think everybody had that intention. And all I did was strike the match. The fire went forward. I didn't do anything other than that. Thanks be to God, that's what we say.
Today, Pam Kent is healthy, grateful, and enjoying every minute of life. She knows how quickly it could be taken from us.
And this should give people incredible hope that there is power in prayer. You know, because you have to believe, and when you believe wholeheartedly, God will take care of you. And so will Sister Blandina.
If or when Blandina is declared blessed, a new miracle will need to be recognized before she can be canonized a saint. Still ahead, back home in Cincinnati, Sister Blandina continues her work.
She was a modern-day Mother Teresa.
How she turned $5 into a way to help immigrants that continues to this day. Just as she did in Trinidad and in Santa Fe, Sister Blandina came out here to Albuquerque and started the first public school. The first hospital, too. She started the first blood bank in New Mexico. Anytime there was something that needed to be done, Sister Blandina saw to it that it got done.
She founded our organization that today is part of Common Spirit Health. She started the St. Joseph's Hospital. So after she returned to Cincinnati, she was asked to come back in 1900 and was here for 1900, 1901 to open the Hospital of St. Joseph. But she secured the property, the deed for the property, then having an architect design the first hospital, which was called a sanitarium. This is the blueprint of it. And she personally was involved in what this should look like, how it should function.
Now, the story we're about to tell you is a story of eternal vigilance lived by a young woman innocent as Eve.
Welcome to Trinidad. Good luck.
A new movie called At the End of the Santa Fe Trail highlights some of Sister Blandina's incredible accomplishments in the Wild West. The movie takes its name from the title of the book of letters she wrote to her sister, Sister Justina. One of the scenes includes building an entire school with absolutely no money. One of her letters explained how she was going to do it.
Here is my plan, sister. Borrow a crowbar, get on the roof of the schoolhouse, and begin to detach adobes. The first person who sees me will ask, "What are you doing, sister?" I will answer, tumbling down this structure to rebuild it before opening the fall term of school. I borrowed a crowbar and went on the roof, detached some adobes, began throwing them down.
The first person to see Sister Blandina on the roof was Juanita Simpson, the wife of a respected and wealthy businessman.
When she saw me at work, she exclaimed, "For the love of God, sister, what are you doing?" I answered, "We need a schoolhouse, so I am demolishing this one in order to rebuild." "How many men do you need, sister?" she said. "We need not only men, but also straw, molds, hods, shovels, everything it takes to build a house with a shingle roof. Our assets are goodwill and energy."
Mrs. Simpson delivered. She returned with 6 men in less than an hour, and the school was rebuilt. In addition to schools and hospitals, Blandina also started the first nursing school in New Mexico. She challenged government and military leaders for the fair treatment of Native Americans. She helped orphans, and outlaws, and mistreated railroad workers. She was an influence on legendary movie director Cecil B. DeMille. He paid her a visit at the convent in New Mexico. She's the little nun standing next to him.
She founded St. Vincent Academy. It was the first girls' school in New Mexico, and it was closer to where the new railroad was coming. And so she was foresighted enough to know that where she had started, which is now Blandina Convent with a big name on it, that wasn't going to be convenient for the people. We knew that she was very enterprising, that we shouldn't be afraid to start something new. She was vocal when she saw something wrong. She worked to correct it. And so that gave us, a good example.
When she returned to Cincinnati, her work didn't stop. The Archbishop asked the sisters to do something to help the influx of Italian immigrants to the Queen City. She and her sister, Sister Justina, founded the Santa Maria Institute.
That they were given $5 car fare, and they were told to go down and see what could be done for the Italian immigrants over the Rhine and West End. They were teaching school, they were taking care of hundreds of school kids after school, and they had a day nursery so the mothers could work if they had to, kindergarten, every kind of educational and social program that you could think of going on down there. Plus they had a lot of home visits. I mean, they, I think, really were almost pioneers in social work. And I mean, Santa Maria is considered the first Catholic settlement house in the country. She worked at Santa Maria for 35 years. And what they did at Santa Maria is just phenomenal. I mean, in terms of what they were able to build.
That $5 investment is still paying dividends. Today, it's called Santa Maria Community Services, and it's celebrating its 125th anniversary.
Yeah, I think our mission is still very much tied to helping those that are most disadvantaged, helping them take responsibility for their own lives. And I know that that would have been a part of her care and concern, was making sure families had access to resources, that they were learning the English language if they were not from this country, that they were getting a job, getting their kids in school. A lot of things that we're doing still today. We're really here to help families advocate to achieve their educational, financial, and health goals. That's part of our mission, and so we think that's an extension of really our purpose from the very beginning. So she started with $5, and now we're about a $4.5 million budget every year, and we have about 55 employees.
When a group of Italian immigrants in Cincinnati wanted a place of their own to worship, Sister Blandina helped them find one. She's one of the founders of San Antonio Catholic Church in South Fairmount.
When Sister Blandina reached out to them, saw the need for her, and Sister Justina and Sister Euphrasia all came to work with this population of Italian immigrants to teach them how to function in a new society here. She taught them sewing classes, citizenship classes, how to become American citizens. And they did. And then they had the tools to start a church.
With $3,400 in donations, the sisters bought a building on Queen City Avenue that would be the site of their first church and a center for children. 18 years later, parishioners were able to build this church. The parish, proud of its Italian heritage, is celebrating 100 years.
She always said to them, don't let anyone take your church away. Fight for it. And I think that's what she taught everybody. We're grateful every day, every Sunday, that when we come in here, we're able to have a Mass, to worship here, to come back to the neighborhood where our ancestors came from, and still feel a part of this community, even though we don't live here. Many of us come from all different areas, but yet we're drawn back to this church. She mentored to so many people in this neighborhood, and many still have stories from their families because of her.
She was the Mother Teresa of our period, of our day. All the things she undertook, all the things she accomplished. And that's just here in Cincinnati. I hear other stories where she had influence and met other notable people of the day. She was something else. She was the Mother Teresa of our day.
The child of Italian immigrants, Buddy LaRosa, saw Sister Blandina's work firsthand and received blessings from her.
I had met Sister when I was 11 years old. I had 8 aunts and uncles, my mother being one of them. And most of them grew up with Sister Blandina coming to the house, whatever the need was. She'd get the right person to help them. She started out with a tremendous amount of spirit and conviction of her faith. And that was what I think really drove her. She wanted to spread the word of God the way she did. She didn't see any difference between races or nobody. They're just God's creation. And whatever she can do to make you feel better or be better, she's going to help you. And she would, whoever it was.
When Sister Blandina died, it's believed she had instructed 80% of the Italian population in Cincinnati. Still ahead, a living legacy.
So I think that is her great example to me, is to try to emulate her in some small way.
How this servant of God is influencing future generations. Blandina and the sisters visited every place in the city that cared for poor people, including jails and hospitals. That's where Blandina met a woman lured here with the promise of a job. Instead, she ended up in a house of prostitution as a victim of human trafficking.
You know, she was trying to help her, and the lady says, well, I'm beyond help, just, you know, forget me. And she says, well, tell me your story so that I can understand. And, you know, it was a typical story at that time. It's a typical story now. I mean, she was from a small town. Some man came to town, lured her to come to the big city with the promise of a job. She gets here and she winds up in a house of prostitution, and then she knows nobody here. She's ashamed of her, what has happened to her. She doesn't want to go home because she's ashamed, and she's sick now. She's in the hospital, and Blandina marches herself right down. She says, where is this place? And the lady tells her, and she marches herself right down and goes to the door and says to the woman, I demand that you close this place. But then she gets all these lawyers to take this cause up, and they had this whole campaign against white slavery in the city, and she's the one that started it.
She knew that experience, the exploitation of people coming in and manipulating the law to their benefit. So justice was one of her core values. So compassion and charity, but justice.
In 1910, Sister Blandina spent several months traveling in New York and New Jersey to research ways to teach deaf children. She visited different schools for the deaf to study teaching methods. She brought them home to the sisters teaching here. A year later, she attended a conference where she met inventor Thomas Edison and asked his advice on how she could help deaf children. This is the letter he wrote to her, sharing details on a potential hearing device and how it could be built. It's among the many items in the Sisters of Charity archives. Her research led to the foundation of St. Rita's School for the Deaf. Stories about Sister Blandina's adventurous and hard-working life are being passed down to new generations, including some members of her own family.
My mom told me that she'd always said, oh, she came in a chauffeur-driven limousine. Years later, I found out that actually the gentleman was a funeral operator, and he brought her in the hearse. Sister Blandina would come to her home and would sit there and describe the nature, the buildings, the tumbleweeds, and you know what the scenery was like. And my mother's mother would draw these just from what she was saying. They ended up, all of her sketches were in her first book, The End of the Santa Fe Trail. She found a way, you know, she found a way to do anything and everything on a shoestring or on a nickel, whatever it took for her to get it done.
The more you found out about her, the more it was like, oh my goodness, this lady sure did a lot. I mean, all the things, the buildings that she built, and so it's really a fascinating story. I wished in our childhood we would have known more about it.
Right. Well, we all went through Catholic school, so we understood the life of a nun as a teacher. But when you learn what Sister Blandina did, she's built the school so she could be a teacher in the school. She built the hospitals, and she took care of the orphans. So she was an amazing woman. It just makes you feel like, how could she possibly have done all that?
She never did anything for any recognition or any financial gain. She was a servant of God. And I think her lesson to us is that we all should be servants of God. And so I think that is her great example to me, is to try to emulate her in some small way, very small way, to be a servant of God.
Who would have ever dreamed in a million years that we'd have a saint in our family?
I think what's amazing to know that you have a saint in your family, you know, so I was able to say to my kids, you have sainthood in your genes, you can do this.
Yeah.
So we'll see how we all end up.
Sister Blandina would return to Italy once when she was 81 years old. She went to meet with Pope Pius, as the founder of her order, Elizabeth Ann Seton, was considered for sainthood. Blandina was the petitioner for the cause, the same role Alan Sanchez now holds in her case.
When she would see somebody in need, she would recognize them as the image of God.
I would say she was tireless in working for the poor. I think she was indomitable in the sense that she just pushed through and did what most people would consider impossible to achieve with very little means.
And when you hear her story, you can't help but to find your own hero in you, because history repeats itself. And if we can repeat going down the path that Blandina did, the world will be a better place. She'll give hope to those who are downtrodden. She'll give hope to those who are migrating. And she'll give hope to those who are struggling for justice. Even if Blandina is never made a saint, you have offered this little one as an example to the world. So Blandina is an example for all of us, especially when we see what we're facing in our world today.
Sister Blandina Segale died in 1941 here at the Sisters of Charity Mother House in Delhi. She was 91 years old. Her long life of service here on earth had come to an end. But there are those who believe she is still hard at work. From above,